Welcome back, everybody, to Manga Mondays, the only manga review show that I think is doing its first ever episode by request, because I was sent Solanin, the graphic novel by Inio Asano, by a fan, Wada, who does the podcast about my content, the Digiboys, and is also a big patron. Shout out to Wada from Sweden, sent this book all the way from there, and, I've been meaning to read this for fucking eternity, because this was the first Inio Asano book I heard of, long before I'd ever heard his name. When it came out stateside, I was always curious about it, because I really like this cute girl on the cover, in the beanie, and I wanted to know about it. And I had heard it was about music and coming of age, and those were things I was really into around the time that this came out, so I was excited about it, but I never got around to reading it, even though I had several big opportunities to do so. Since then, Inio Asano has sort of caught on as a phenomenon in manga fan circles. Oyasumi Punpun has been a really big deal. It's a lot of people's favorite manga. And it just finished completely releasing stateside, which, I want to read it, but God, it's fucking long and expensive. But, I previously read and reviewed A Girl on the Shore, which you can see right there. I thought was pretty good. So here's another graphic novel from him, and I think this was his first one, going by the afterword in the back. Now, I'm going to say right off the bat, I was not that into Solanin. I didn't resonate with it that strongly. I wasn't that interested in the story. And I think that has equal parts to do with the story itself and with me. And it has to do with the fact that I was such a big fan of this genre and this type of story, and that I've read so much of it. I've read so many stories about basically the struggle of coming into adulthood as an early millennial. This is very much the story of someone who was entering their 20s in the 2000s. And if you've read other stories like that, of which there were a lot in the 2000s, I think perhaps because this was the first generation where there was, tons and tons of creativity going on, everybody online being able to share their creative output, just many more opportunities for young people to get into the industry and start making stuff. And since young people tend to, at the time, were sort of suffering this arrested development as the world kind of moved in a direction where it takes longer and longer to really feel like an adult, longer and longer to get out of, living in your parents' houses and stuff like that. There was just a lot of stories about the arrested development of early millennials, people who are now in their late 30s. So I've read a lot of those and seen a lot of those. This is very much in the vein of like a mumblecore movie or something like that. It's sort of a young adult melodrama. And the problem is I've seen it done better, or stories that just resonated with me more strongly. There's a lot you could compare in this to Scott Pilgrim, for instance. Scott Pilgrim being one of my favorite things ever. And as I was reading this, I just kept thinking, I'd rather be reading Scott Pilgrim, and stuff like that. Like, there's too many other stories that have been this way. And moreover, I am not in this position anymore. So this is a story about a girl who's a 25-year-old who, at the beginning of the story, she quits her job. She's been working for just like a regular-ass office job. She can't stand it. She thinks everybody's a pain in the ass and a bunch of fakes, and she just hates working there. Cause she's a little bit punk rock, Not a lot, but just a little bit. She's not into society, not into people, And she lives with her boyfriend, who she's been dating for 6 years. He doesn't have a job currently, or he works part-time for like a design firm, but he's not really a breadwinner. And so he's kind of, loafing around her house, but she's okay with that. She likes taking care of him, seemingly. She's not pressuring him to do anything in particular, but she is trying to get him to, because he's in a band that's not really been practicing that much. They're kind of at that stage in their career where they're realizing that they couldn't just hit it off. They couldn't hit it big when they were young, and now they're not really sure what they want to do. And she's trying to encourage him to keep going with this band because she sort of vicariously enjoys watching him, be passionate about something, which she doesn't really have that kind of passion. So most of the story is just kind of meandering through the daily lives of these characters as they try to grapple with being in their 20s and not knowing where they're going to go with their future. And it's very direct. Like, characters kind of, like, a lot of their conversations are just about that situation. Like, they just literally are discussing not knowing what to do with their future. Very literally discussing, like, their passions and interests and what they want to do and the confusion they feel towards their futures. And where the story kind of doesn't work for me is in that it doesn't really flesh out these characters. We learn a lot about them living this life, but, like, I never felt like I really cared about them themselves. It felt more like these characters were almost ciphers for the drama. Like, they're ciphers for presenting the ideas of how these young people feel. Like, they exist so we can have a story about how difficult it is to figure out how to become an adult as an early millennial growing up in the 2000s. So, I just individually didn't find myself connecting with these characters very much. And the way that this story is, it kind of feels like I would have resonated with this a lot more when I was younger, but now that I'm kind of like an older person who really didn't have to give up, who actually did succeed at doing what I always wanted to do and sort of becoming an artist. Like, this is the kind of story that's written from the perspective of, like, being unsure about whether you will ever succeed as an artist. And, Inio Asano says in his afterword, I drew Solanin when I was about 24 years old. I had just graduated from college and was feeling a bit insecure about my ability to succeed as a manga artist and whether I would be able to continue to draw manga that were true to myself. In my anxiety and impatience, I felt that all I could do in my manga was try to get a true depiction of the times as experienced by my generation. And he goes on about it a little bit, but, like, that's exactly what he did. And this is the kind of story that you almost wouldn't be able to write outside of that mindset. Because imagine if he had succeeded as a manga artist, I don't think he would be so quick to write a story about characters sort of giving up, or just the ambivalence that is felt at the end of the story, where it's not really clear what's going to happen to these characters in the future, but, like, there's never really given the sense that they will continue to be artists or will succeed at that. So, I feel like, for me, as somebody who's already been through this and sort of moved on and gotten past it, I look at these characters and think, like, well, you're going to learn a lot when you grow up a couple more years, like, not to say that I don't understand and have experienced these emotions, but it's sort of old hat to me. Like, I know these feels, but I'm past them, and they're not interesting to me anymore in a way that they once were. I feel like... And I feel like that is both a testament to myself, but also to the story. Because if it had a cast of really well-fleshed-out characters who I really cared about, then it wouldn't matter what the themes of the story are, I still watch fucking shitloads of high school anime, and I don't relate to being a high schooler anymore, but usually those are shows where I like the characters, or I like the romance between them, or something, like, there's something that grabs my attention. And this book has elements of things I like. I did not dislike this book. I definitely liked the relationship between... Really, all the relationships were the most interesting part. Like, the relationship between the main characters... and the other bandmates, and, like, this one guy in the band, him and his girlfriend are pretty interesting characters. I also like when this book does sometimes get a little bit weird and off-kilter. There are parts where it just shows you really bizarre images, or just gets funny. Like, it just kind of turns into, like, more of a comedy at times. But it doesn't commit to that. Like, it doesn't commit to being, like, a dark comedy. It doesn't commit to, being weird all the time. Like, the baseline story, the emotional moments, have the gravity that you would expect from them. So, it was something where every once in a while I'd see a little glimmer of something that I might like. But, again, to compare it to, like, Scott Pilgrim, which, like, fully commits to being in this weird kind of alternate universe where all kinds of crazy, fun stuff happens, and, in many ways that enhances the emotions of the characters, because it adds that extra layer of sort of abstraction that can give it extra meaning, that this book is a little bit more direct. It's pretty in your face. And, I don't know, it struck me as, like, very normie in a way. Like, it's just stuff that I feel like any person this age in this generation would connect to and appreciate this. Like, you know, the first chapter is just a 25-year-old girl being like, I'm 25, I hate my job, I really don't like people around me, and I want to quit. And I'm like, literally any 25-year-old girl would probably feel exactly the same, you know? So, it's just, I don't know. It just feels a little bit too broad for my taste, is I guess what I'm saying. And I can't help but feel like it's a natural consequence of him being 24 when he wrote the story. Like, I'm 26 now, you know, I'm older than he was when he wrote this. I'm kind of, you know, not only past the emotions the characters are feeling, but past the emotions that he was feeling when he wrote the story. You know, and not to say that, like, that's a linear thing that you'll experience with age. Like, 2 years is not that huge of a difference. But, like, in this case, it's the crucial 2 years between he was 24 and wasn't successful yet. I'm 26 and am successful at, you know, whatever artistic career I wanted to pursue. And that makes a huge difference in the way that you perceive the world and, you know, the kind of angst that you're dealing with. So, yeah, from here on, I'm gonna get into spoilers because I've pretty much said my piece about my general opinions of the book, but there's some stuff I want to touch on. So if you want to read this, if you like Inio Asano, if honestly, if this sounds like a story that would interest you, go read it. You'll probably love it. Like, this is a very beloved story. I'm not surprised that a lot of people connected with it, and I think there's a chance I would have if I'd read it a few years earlier. But, you know, like, I also recommend you go read Scott Pilgrim, because that's one of my favorite comics. But anyway, getting into spoiler territory. So, the big plot twist of this book is that halfway through, the boyfriend dies. The boyfriend he can't figure out what he wants to do with his life. He decides that he's going to try to get a job and do the band at the same time. But, like, it's very clear that he can't quite wrap his mind around, like, being a normal guy. Like, he really hates the idea of living the normie life. He really wants to be a rock star. He really wants to be a musician who's, like, just screams his passion out on the stage. And every little compromise away from that hurts him. And so, right after he makes the big decision to, like, get a regular job and try to do music on the side, knowing he's probably not gonna be able to, really, he goes on his bike and he's screaming and driving as fast as he can, and he gets fucking plowed by a truck and dies. Now, the funniest thing to me about that is the fact that I literally came up with this exact same scene that I wanted to do in a movie. I had, for a long time, like many years, I've had this idea of making a young adult drama film in which the main character is with, or like a couple of main characters are on bikes together, and one of them is sort of the one who's like the more ambitious guy, and he's like giving a speech about all this stuff he wants to do in the future, and then there'd be a shot of him riding his bike a little bit further out in front, and then he'd just get owned by a bus, and the rest of the film would completely change because the central character has died, and now everybody has to change the way they think about what their lives are. Literally happens in this book. The exact way that I just described it, except he's on a motorbike, and it's sort of implied that he was maybe trying to kill himself. It's kind of unclear. I can't confidently say that he wanted to die at that moment, but that he did something reckless, you know, he was suicidal enough to do something reckless, but it didn't really seem like he was trying to kill himself. It's at least halfway an accident. But, like, it's the same fucking scene that I wanted to put into a story, and the story I had in mind was just like this. So yeah, that was surreal, reading something so close to, like, what I had imagined. But the way that the story changes after that is kind of interesting, but then it doesn't really go far enough to ultimately end up being that impactful, which is that the girl kind of ends up taking up the guy's guitar and joining the band. She decides to fill in his role in the band after a conversation she has with his dad, where he sort of says to her, like, that maybe her her part in his story was to like keep his memory alive or something to that effect. And basically, this just builds up to her learning how to play guitar. She goes with the band and they perform live. They perform the songs that she was like that she really loved from him, and that's about it. Like they play the live show, and then it's implied that like they might keep doing the band, but there's no clear suggestion that they're going to succeed. There's no real suggestion that like this is going to eventuate in a very clean way. It's just kind of like she joined the band and did some stuff, you know, in memory of the guy. But I don't really know what it says about her as a character, honestly. Like, it didn't feel to me that she developed a love for music and performing. It was more like she just wanted to do this so that she could preserve the memory of the guy. There's not a sense that she like got way into guitar playing and singing as a result. It's more like she just wanted to, you know, sort of find closure by performing at this show. You know, in the end, it's very ambivalent about what she's going to be doing. She's starting up a new job. You know, it's just basically going back to life as normal now that this is off of her chest. So I didn't really feel like the whole her learning to play guitar and being in the band thing ultimately changed much about the characters or gave me more insight into them as people. It was just kind of a story, you know, just kind of a way of showing characters dealing with grief. There's some okay scenes in there, but there's also some stuff that's weird. Like, there's one part where she's, like, at the riverbed, like, you know, mind swirling with all this music and stuff, and she's got a guitar on her. And this little kid, who looks just like her boyfriend who died, comes up, and he's, like, asking her what she's doing there. And he asks her to play guitar for him. So she plays for him, and he tells her, like, he's really into it. And then her friend shows up and is like, hey, what's going on? And she's like half passed out or something like that. Or she's just, like, in a haze. And then she's like, what happened to that little boy? And she's like, huh? There was no little boy here. And at that moment, I had to think, okay, how am I meant to read this moment? Because one of two things had to have happened here. Either the girl has lost her mind and is hallucinating that this little boy is there, who happens to look just like her boyfriend who died, or some weird spiritual shit is happening, and his ghost showed up as a baby, or I don't fucking know. Like, literally, what am I supposed to interpret out of that scene? It was a very strange thing, because otherwise the story is pretty normal. Like, sometimes you see goofy, funny stuff, and sometimes it might even stretch reality ever so slightly. Usually not by much, but, like, it's a little exaggerated in moments, but most of it's, like, a pretty serious, straightforward, like, story of life in Tokyo. So, what was going on there? And it's kind of, like, important. Like, it's kind of, like, an important pep talk moment for her of, like a sort of self-actualization happens there. Am I meant to believe that she, like, imagined that? Or, like, it was a metaphor? Because, like, she seems to think that that kid was actually there. Like, she believes that that really happened. So, I don't know. I just didn't know how to take that scene. It was a strange feeling reading it. So yeah, overall, this is an okay book. I wasn't that into it. I would recommend it to other people if it seems like your kind of thing. If you generally like Inio Asano, you've probably already read it. It's definitely way less, like, twisted and experimental and, like, psychologically deep than, say, A Girl on the Shore, whereas that story felt like it had something much more unique to say than this one did. That story explored sexuality and depression in more interesting ways than this book did. And I wouldn't be surprised if I could say the same of Oyasumi Punpun. Overall, I'm not sure how much Inio Asano is really my, like, aesthetic. I don't really know how much his stories would resonate with me that strongly. Like, even A Girl on the Shore, I thought it was a good book, but it's not really my style. You know, I really feel like he's just probably more broadly accessible, but not necessarily for me. But I still want to read his other stuff. I definitely want to read Dead Dead Demons Day 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 Destruction, since it's recommended to me all the time. But anyway, that's it. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next week.